Louisville, Kentucky, 1960. The air was thick with humidity as summer clung stubbornly to the city streets. Cassius Clay, just 18 years old, stepped off the plane at Standiford Field Airport, his Olympic gold medal hanging proudly around his neck. The bright Italian sun of Rome still seemed to radiate from his skin as he walked through the terminal, his eyes scanning the crowd for familiar faces. "Cassius, over here, son." His father's voice cut through the noise of the bustling airport. Cassius Clay Sr. stood tall among the small gathering that had come to welcome home Louisville's champion. Next to him was Odessa, Cassius's mother, her eyes glistening with pride and unshed tears. His younger brother Rudolph pushed through the small crowd, rushing toward the Olympic champion. "You really did it, Cash. You really showed him," Rudolph exclaimed, admiring the gold medal that represented not just athletic achievement, but something far more profound in 1960s America. Cassius grinned, that now famous smile lighting up his face. "I told you I would, didn't I? The greatest in the world." His voice carried confidence that many mistook for arrogance, but those who knew him understood it was something else entirely. A shield, a declaration, a necessary armor. The small welcome party made their way through the terminal, heading toward the exit. A reporter from the Louisville Courier-Journal approached, notepad in hand. "Cassius, how does it feel to bring Olympic gold back to Louisville?" the reporter asked, pencil poised. "It feels like justice," Cassius replied, his eyes suddenly serious. "I beat everyone they put in front of me. Nobody can deny what I did in that ring." The reporter scribbled quickly. "And now that you're home, what's next?" "Professional. I'm going professional," Cassius declared without hesitation. "And I'm going to be the heavyweight champion of the world. You can write that down. It's not a prediction, it's a fact." As they exited the airport, the warm Kentucky air embraced them, but so did the reality of 1960s America. The jubilation of victory began to fade as they approached a local diner where they had planned to celebrate his homecoming. Clay Sr. hesitated at the entrance, exchanging a knowing glance with Odessa. "Maybe we should just head home," he suggested quietly. "Your mother's prepared your favorite meal." But Cassius, still riding the high of Olympic victory, shook his head. "We're celebrating. Right here, right now." The diner fell quiet as they entered, conversations halting mid-sentence as heads turned toward the Clay family. The gold medal gleamed under the fluorescent lights, impossible to miss. A few patrons nodded in recognition, some even offered small smiles of congratulation, but most quickly returned to their meals, discomfort evident in the stiffness of their shoulders. They settled into a booth near the back, Cassius deliberately placing his medal on the table. A waitress approached, her smile professional but tight at the corners. "What can I get for you folks?" she asked, eyes flickering to the medal before returning to her notepad. "I want the biggest burger you've got," Cassius announced. Olympic fighting builds an appetite. His father ordered coffee, his mother just water. The meal progressed with an undercurrent of tension that Cassius either didn't notice or chose to ignore. He recounted his Olympic bouts in animated detail, his hands moving through the air to demonstrate his famous footwork. "You should have seen their faces when I slipped that right hook from the Russian. Man couldn't touch me, I was floating." "Cassius," his mother interrupted gently, "perhaps a little quieter, son." The young boxer looked around, suddenly aware of the glances being thrown their way. His jaw tightened momentarily before he nodded, lowering his voice but continuing his story with undiminished enthusiasm. After dinner, as they walked back to the car, Rudolph asked the question that had been on all their minds. "The medal's great, Cash, but did it change anything?" "Really?" Cassius looked down at his younger brother, the weight of the question settling on his shoulders alongside the gold medal. "Not yet," he said finally, "but it will. Just watch." 4 years later, Cassius Clay was no longer just an Olympic champion. He had fought his way through the professional ranks with spectacular speed, his unorthodox style and unprecedented footwork confounding opponents and delighting crowds. His mouth moved as fast as his feet, predicting the rounds in which he would defeat his opponents with uncanny accuracy. The press called him the Louisville Lip, some with affection, others with disdain. In February 1964, against all odds and expert predictions, he defeated Sonny Liston to become the heavyweight champion of the world at just 22 years old. The very next day, he shocked the world again by announcing his conversion to Islam and his new name, Muhammad Ali. "I don't have to be what you want me to be," he told the press, who struggled with his new identity. I'm free to be who I want. The transformation from Cassius Clay to Muhammad Ali came with a price. Many refused to call him by his chosen name. Sponsorships disappeared overnight. Former supporters turned their backs. But Ali stood firm, embracing not just a new faith, but a new political consciousness that would define the rest of his life. By 1967, America was deeply entrenched in the Vietnam War. Young men across the country were being drafted to fight in a conflict many didn't understand or support. When Ali received his draft notice, the nation held its breath, waiting for his response. Why should they ask me to put on a uniform and go 10,000 miles from home and drop bombs and bullets on brown people in Vietnam while so-called Negro people in Louisville are treated like dogs? He questioned publicly. In April of that year, he officially refused to be inducted into the armed forces. "I ain't got no quarrel with them Viet Cong," he famously declared. The reaction was swift and severe. Ali was stripped of his heavyweight title. His boxing license was suspended. He faced a 5-year prison sentence and a $10,000 fine for draft evasion. At the height of his physical prime, the greatest boxer in the world was effectively banned from his profession. For 3 years, Ali couldn't fight professionally. He made a living giving speeches at colleges and universities, becoming a voice for civil rights and anti-war movements. His eloquence outside the ring proved as powerful as his jabs inside it. Though financially strapped, spiritually and morally, he remained unbowed. In 1970, with public opinion turning against the Vietnam War, Ali was finally able to return to boxing. The Supreme Court would later overturn his conviction, but the years of his prime fighting condition had been lost forever. It was during this comeback period, as Ali fought to reclaim his title and his legacy, that he encountered one of the most public instances of discrimination in his already tumultuous career. Atlanta, Georgia, 1970. The city was hosting a major charity event at its most prestigious hotel, bringing together celebrities, politicians, and athletes for a fundraiser supporting children's education. Given Ali's growing status as not just an athlete but a cultural and political figure, the organizers had extended him an invitation, though not without internal debate. The grand ballroom of the Peachtree Plaza Hotel glittered with chandeliers and the jewelry of Atlanta's elite. Men in tuxedos and women in evening gowns mingled, cocktails in hand while a jazz quartet played softly in the corner. Ali arrived dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, his presence commanding attention the moment he stepped through the doors. A hush fell over the nearest group of attendees, the reaction rippling through the room like a wave. Some faces lit up with excitement, others darkened with disapproval. Ali was used to both. He moved through the crowd with dignity, shaking hands with those who offered them, nodding politely to those who didn't. James Whitaker, a city official and one of the event organizers, watched Ali's entrance with growing discomfort. Whitaker had opposed inviting the controversial boxer, but had been overruled by younger members of the committee who argued that Ali's presence would generate significant press coverage and potentially larger donations. "He's making quite the entrance," muttered Robert Thornton, another official standing beside Whitaker. "You'd think he was still the champion." "In his mind, he always will be," Whitaker replied, sipping his bourbon. Humility was never his strong suit. Ali made his way toward the front of the ballroom where round tables were arranged for the dinner portion of the evening. Place cards marked assigned seating, with the most prominent guests positioned at tables nearest the stage. Ali located his name at a table near the center of the room, alongside other notable athletes and entertainers. As he pulled out his chair, Whitaker suddenly appeared at his elbow. "I'm afraid there's been a mistake with the seating arrangements," Whitaker said, his voice carrying just enough to draw attention from nearby tables. "You can't sit here." The conversation around them dimmed as people tuned into the interaction. Ali looked at Whitaker, then at the place card clearly showing his name, then back at the official. "My name's right here," Ali said calmly, tapping the card with his index finger. Whitaker cleared his throat. "Yes, well, there's been a last-minute change. We've had to rearrange some things to accommodate certain guests." "Which guests?" Ali asked, still standing beside the chair. "Important sponsors," Whitaker replied vaguely. "I'm sure you understand. There's another table in the back that would be more appropriate." The implication hung in the air, impossible to miss. Several people at neighboring tables shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A photographer who had been circulating through the room paused, his camera halfway to his face. Ali stood perfectly still, his eyes locked on Whitaker's, The room seemed to hold its breath. Those who expected an outburst, the famous Ali temper, the rapid-fire verbal jabs, were surprised by the controlled silence that stretched between the two men. When Ali finally spoke, his voice was measured, quiet enough that people leaned forward to hear, yet somehow filling the entire ballroom. "Mr. Whitaker, I recognize you. You were one of the people who said I'd never beat Liston. You said I talked too much, that I didn't know my place." Ali smiled, but the expression didn't reach his eyes. "You were wrong then and you're wrong now." He gestured toward the place card. "This event is raising money for children's education, correct? What lesson are you teaching those children right now?" Whitaker's face flushed red. "This isn't about, it's always about that." Ali interrupted. "You don't want me at this table because of who I am, what I believe, and the color of my skin. But let me tell you something." Ali raised his voice slightly, ensuring his words would carry. "I've traveled all over the world. I've been welcomed by kings and presidents. I've had dinner with people who don't speak my language but showed me more respect than some folks in my own country. I've stood up for what I believe in and paid a heavy price for it." He paused, looking around the room at the captivated audience. "So when you tell me I can't sit here, I have to wonder, what are you afraid of? That I'll say something that makes you uncomfortable? That I'll challenge your ideas about who belongs where? Or are you afraid that, if you sit down with me, you might find out I'm a human being just like you?" A murmur ran through the crowd. Someone in the back began to applaud, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. Others joined in, the sound building until it filled the ballroom. A prominent businessman from a neighboring table stood up. "Mr. Ali, if they don't want you at that table, we'd be honored to have you join us." "As would we," called a woman from another table. Ali raised his hand, quieting the room. "Thank you, but that's not the point. I was invited to this event as a guest just like everyone else. My name is on this card, at this table. Either we all play by the same rules, or the game is rigged. And I didn't become the greatest by playing rigged games." He turned back to Whitaker, who stood frozen in the spotlight of public attention. "So, Mr. Whitaker, what's it going to be? Are you going to stand by your mistake, or are you going to correct it?" The tension in the room was palpable. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment for tomorrow's newspapers. Whitaker looked around, suddenly aware that he had miscalculated badly. What he had intended as a quiet reassertion of the old order had become a very public test of character. His own. "Of course," Whitaker finally said, his voice strained. "It was indeed a mistake. Please take your seat, Mr. Ali." Ali nodded, pulling out the chair, but before sitting, he had one last thing to say. "You know, this isn't about me. It's about all the people who look like me who get told every day where they can and can't go, what they can and can't do, who they can and can't be. I'm lucky. People know my name. They watch my fights. They listen when I speak. Most folks don't have that privilege. So when I stand my ground, I'm standing for them too." He sat down and the room erupted in applause. Even those who had disapproved of Ali's political stances or religious conversion couldn't help but acknowledge the dignity and eloquence with which he had handled the situation. Photographers scrambled to capture the moment, and reporters scribbled furiously in their notepads. What had been intended as a humiliation had instead become one of Ali's most powerful moments outside the ring, a demonstration that his fighting spirit wasn't limited to boxing. He had faced discrimination not with his fists, but with his words, his principles, and his unwavering self-respect. The incident made headlines across the country the next day. "You can't sit here. Ali's response stuns Atlanta elite," read one newspaper. The story resonated far beyond sports pages, becoming part of the ongoing national conversation about civil rights, respect, and dignity. For many Americans, particularly those in the Black community, Ali's response represented something profound: the refusal to accept second-class treatment, delivered not through anger but through a calm insistence on basic human dignity. It was a masterclass in turning a moment of potential humiliation into one of moral victory. In the years that followed, Ali would face many more battles both in and out of the ring. In 1971, he would fight Joe Frazier in the fight of the century, losing by unanimous decision but proving he could still compete at the highest level despite his forced hiatus. In 1974, against overwhelming odds, he would defeat George Foreman in the famous Rumble in the Jungle to reclaim the heavyweight championship at age 32. His career would continue with legendary fights, including the brutal Thrilla in Manila rematch against Frazier and 2 more bouts with Leon Spinks. His later years in boxing showed his remarkable courage, but also took a devastating toll on his health. By the time he retired in 1981, the early signs of Parkinson's disease were already appearing, the cruel price of too many punches absorbed by a body that had once moved with unparalleled grace. But throughout all these physical battles, it was perhaps moments like that night in Atlanta that defined Ali's true legacy. His refusal to accept disrespect, his insistence on being treated with dignity, and his willingness to stand up not just for himself, but for all those who faced similar discrimination made him more than a champion boxer. They made him a champion of human rights. As Ali himself once said, "Champions aren't made in gyms. Champions are made from something they have deep inside them, a desire, a dream, a vision." That night in Atlanta, when faced with the all-too-familiar words, "You can't sit here," Ali had shown that his vision extended far beyond the boxing ring. It encompassed a world where people were judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. A world still in the making, but one he helped bring closer through his words and actions. Long after his boxing achievements faded into history, it would be moments like these that ensured Muhammad Ali's place not just in sports legend, but in the broader story of America's long, ongoing struggle for equality and justice. In standing his ground that night with quiet dignity and powerful eloquence, the man who had proclaimed himself the greatest had proved once again that the title referred to much more than his prowess in the ring. The years after Ali's retirement saw him transform from a controversial figure to a beloved global icon. Despite the physical limitations imposed by Parkinson's disease, he remained active in humanitarian causes, traveling the world as an unofficial ambassador of peace and goodwill. The man once reviled by much of white America for his religious conversion and anti-war stance was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2005, the nation's highest civilian honor. When Ali died in 2016, the world mourned not just a boxing champion, but a man who had transcended sport to become a symbol of courage, conviction, and dignity in the face of adversity. His funeral in Louisville drew thousands of mourners from all walks of life, along with world leaders and celebrities who came to pay their respects. Among those who eulogized him was a man who had been a young boy in Atlanta that night in 1970. He had been working at the event, the son of one of the hotel's kitchen staff allowed to peek into the ballroom during the reception. He had witnessed Ali's stand against discrimination, a moment that had shaped his own understanding of dignity and self-respect. "I was just a kid," he told the hushed crowd, watching from the service entrance. "But when I heard Muhammad Ali say those words about standing not just for himself but for all of us who look like him, I stood a little taller that day, and I've been trying to stand tall ever since." The story of that night had been told and retold countless times over the decades, sometimes embellished, occasionally disputed, but always powerful in its essential truth. Faced with discrimination, Muhammad Ali had responded not with rage, but with reason. Not with his fists, but with his principles. In doing so, he had turned a moment of potential humiliation into a triumph of human dignity that resonated far beyond those present to witness it. It was just one episode in a life filled with remarkable achievements and provocative contradictions, but it captured something essential about the man who had proclaimed himself the greatest, his unwavering belief in his own worth and the worth of all people, regardless of race, religion, or circumstance. In his autobiography, Ali would write of such moments, "I've never thought of myself as a racial leader or a political figure. I'm a boxer who found himself in positions where he had to stand up for his beliefs. If that helped other people find the courage to stand up for theirs, then maybe that's the best fight I ever won." In life, Muhammad Ali had been many things to many people. A supreme athlete, a controversial convert, a draft resistor, a humanitarian, a patient suffering from a debilitating disease. But in moments like that night in Atlanta, when he calmly but firmly refused to accept second-class treatment, he was something perhaps even greater, a man of principle willing to risk everything to stand up for what he believed was right. "The service you do for others," Ali once said, "is the rent you pay for your room here on earth." By that measure, Muhammad Ali paid his rent many times over, not least on that night when he heard the words, "You can't sit here," and responded with a dignity and eloquence that left his audience shocked, moved, and for many, forever changed. If you made it this far and felt every word, don't leave without subscribing. I tell these stories with my heart in my hand to reach people like you, who feel, who get emotional, who truly live. If this really touched you, return the favor. Comment. Subscribe. Come be part of this family with me until the next video.